Welcome back, everybody. It's been a few weeks since I've posted a video. Could not be helped, but I'm glad to be back talking to you. And I'm not sure how everyone else has been doing, but it's been a challenging time. And so I thought that to break the long silence of a few weeks, that I would post a video inspired by some gratitude that I want to express for all the friends that I've made along the way. And so the topic of today's discussion is the nature of friendship. And I'm taking my starting point for this discussion, Aristotle's discussion of the nature of friendship from the Nicomachean Ethics. So Aristotle is, of course, rightly regarded as one of the greatest philosophers who ever lived, the direct disciple of Plato, and probably the first systematic philosopher, in the sense that he had a complete system. He had basically thought about everything and tried to provide a unified theory that covered and connected all the different branches of his thinking. Aristotle wrote on almost every conceivable topic: logic, metaphysics, ethics, politics, aesthetics, as well as scientific topics like biology and cosmology. So even though he's far away from us in time, he's still taken very seriously, especially as an ethical thinker. So an important figure, to be clear. I do want to note right at the outset that I am not an expert in Aristotle, and that's one of the reasons that I've included this video in the Life, Love, and Things That Matter section of the YouTube channel, because I do not possess the philological expertise to speak about this material in a way that would reflect my own standards for giving something more like an academic talk. So the level at which I'm going to be treating of this material is in a way that's basically commensurate with how I discuss this stuff in an introduction to philosophy class that I deliver on a yearly basis to freshmen. So that's going to be sort of the level at which I will hold myself accountable as an exegete of Aristotle. And my hope here is to say something practical and hopefully existentially important about friendship through and with Aristotle as a guide. But I will not claim to be an Aristotle scholar. And if anything that I say is sufficiently wrong-headed to any of my Aristotle scholar friends who may be out there, my advanced apologies, and please feel free to get a hold of me and inform me of any errors that I've made. So Aristotle's views on friendship arise in the context of him trying to give an account of ethics. And ethical theories of the sort that Aristotle gives, broadly speaking, attempt to explain what makes an action moral or not, or what principles help us anchor judgments of what's moral or not. So for example, and this is my sort of go-to favorite example, we can mostly all agree, I think, that something like punching babies is a bad thing. And anyone who's, tempted to reflect for a moment and ask themselves, well, is it really bad to punch babies? We would rightly regard that person as being something of a moral failure. But an ethical theory is going to attempt to explain why it's bad. It seems obvious that it is, but what are the principles that make it bad? That's an ethical theory, and different ethical theories will provide different answers to the question, even if they all agree that the action is bad. So broadly speaking, we can divide ethical theories into three types. And this is sort of a very, quote unquote, Western way of understanding the terrain here. And there are ways of pushing back against this. But I think for the sake of a useful heuristic, we can just start with these three. We have consequentialist theories, deontological theories, and virtue theories. So consequentialist theories will say that a given action is morally good if and only if it leads to a result that is maximally beneficial to the maximum number of people. Hence the term consequentialist. The consequences are what matter. A deontological theorist will say that an action is morally good if and only if one's intention in performing the action is derived from one's sense of duty. So here it's your intentions that matter. You have to do the right thing for the right reason. Third, and for our purposes most importantly, is virtue theories. Virtue theories claim that an action is morally good if and only if doing the action leads to the development of, or is itself derived from or properly motivated by, a certain canon of virtues. And Aristotle is certainly the most famous virtue theorist in ethics. And there are different ways of doing virtue theory, but we're going to just very broadly stick with Aristotle for a minute to get the point on the table and move our conversation into the field of discussing friendship. So Aristotle believes that all human action has a purpose or a telos that aims at happiness or eudaimonia. Now, this isn't just your average, ordinary, everyday happiness. This is a very profound happiness that comes from fully actualizing your nature, for being the most what you are. A kind of flourishing that comes with fully unfolding one's nature into the world. Now, one achieves that eudaimonia through the cultivation of certain virtues, each of which is achieved through a kind of hitting the mean between extremes. So, for example, Aristotle considers courage to be a virtue, and courage is achieved by avoiding the excess of rashness and the deficiency of cowardice. And so it is a mean between the extremes of excess and deficiency. So moral excellence, on Aristotle's view, comes from cultivating virtues that arise through the achievement of a mean between extremes in various situations. Now, because the development of virtue, the actual establishment of character traits, is a vastly social project. It's one that happens on the basis of relationships. At a very early stage of development, paradigmatically, the relationship between one and one's parents. And as we grow, our friends, our other family members, our colleagues, our partners. So because of this social dimension that's involved in establishing virtue, friendship becomes of paramount importance to an account of how to live a virtuous life. So Aristotle praises friendship very highly for this reason. He claims that it is, quote, besides most necessary with a view to living, for without friends, no one would choose to live, though they had all other goods. That is a very strong claim. And the way to understand the weight of this claim is to imagine a life without friends. It would not be a life worth living, according to Aristotle. And Aristotle claims even further, even more strongly, that even if one had all other goods in abundance, that without friends to share them with, one would still not choose to continue living. So friendship is a very deeply existential issue for Aristotle. It's a matter of life and death. Now, how do we define it? Well, broadly speaking, it's a kind of love that we have for others. But we love in different ways and for different reasons. Therefore, we must understand what is particular about the love of friendship. So to start, Aristotle distinguishes between three different objects of love. We love useful things because of their use to us. We love pleasant things because of the pleasure they give us. And we love good things because of what they are, because of the virtue of those things. Okay, so we can love things like our cell phones, for example, and they don't love us back. Okay, so therefore Aristotle wants to conclude that to be friends then They must be mutually recognized as bearing goodwill and wishing well to each other for one of the aforesaid reasons. So a friend is someone we love either as useful, pleasant, or good, and who reciprocates in kind. So therefore, corresponding to the three different objects of love, the useful, the pleasant, and the virtuous, there are three types of friends: a friend of utility, a friend of pleasure, and a friend of virtue. So the useful friend is someone that you love because of what they provide you. The example I always think about is your pot dealer. This might not be someone that you bring home to meet your parents, but this is a friend, and they're really your friend because they provide you with something. So you might hang out with them, but probably not in any case where you don't need what they have to provide, okay? So this isn't a close friend. The friend of pleasure is more complicated because the friend of pleasure is someone who makes you feel good, someone that you feel good around, okay? And you might think, well, what more could there be to it? But Aristotle thinks this is still a deficient form of friendship. And he's going to contrast these first two forms with the friend of virtue. And the friend of virtue is someone that you love because of who they are. Not because of how they make you feel, not because of what they give you, but because of who they are. You love the person because the person is excellent and therefore worthy of your love. So Aristotle will lump friends of utility and friends of pleasure together and then distinguish them very strongly from friends of virtue. And he says the following. He says, now those who love each other because of utility do not love each other for themselves, but in virtue of some good which they get from each other. So too with those who love because of pleasure. It is not for their character that people love ready-witted people, but because they find them pleasant. Therefore, those who love because of utility love because of what is good for themselves. And those who love because of pleasure do so because of what is pleasant to themselves, and not because of who the loved person is, but insofar as he is useful or pleasant. And thus these friendships are only incidental, for it is not as being the person they are that the loved person is loved, but as providing some good or pleasure. So here are the main features that Aristotle sees a friend of utility and a friend of pleasure sharing. He thinks that our love towards these people is selfish. It's selfish because we have friends of this type, not because of who they are, but because of the results that accrue for us. This is particularly important when it comes to friends of pleasure, especially romantic friendship, because when you're in a romantic relationship with somebody, so much of what makes that relationship romantic rather than simply platonic is the special kind of pleasure that you get from being sexually involved with that person. And the romantic feelings that can accompany that if the relationship goes beyond mere sexual pleasure towards, some kind of love bond between you. But the trick here is that so much of our commitment to other people is anchored in how they make us feel. And when those feelings change, and those feelings always change because no feeling is permanent, how quickly do these people get moved out of our lives? This leads Aristotle to think that these sorts of friendships are incidental. That is, at the end of the day, if the reason you love them is because of how it makes you feel, then it doesn't really matter who the other person is, but only what they provide for us. And this means that these friendships are highly changeable because what is useful or pleasant for us changes as we grow. So also do the friends of utility and pleasure change and disappear from our lives quite often. So it's worth considering very deeply the extent to which we love those we claim to love, especially in romantic love, simply because of how they make us feel. And when feelings change, when the spark is gone, how quickly do we cycle these people out of our lives? Very quickly. So when love and friendship are reduced to the presence or absence of feelings, we lose track of the ways in which love is an act, a form of life that is directed towards the other through sustained engagement in action and attention, which in turn, if you're skillful, can create a structure in which the feelings to which we are also very addicted can be recreated and sustained. This is why Aristotle is pretty down on friendships of utility and friendships of pleasure, because in some deep way, they involve the objectification, the instrumentalization of the other. The other person is there simply to provide me with something that I like, or to make me feel a certain way. And when that person ceases to do so, they stop being my friend. So this is why Aristotle thinks that friends of virtue are so important. He says that perfect friendship is the friendship of people who are good and alike in virtue. For these wish well to each other insofar as they're good, and they are good in themselves. So those who wish well to their friends for their own sake are most truly friends. For this they do by reason of their own nature and not incidentally. Therefore, their friendship lasts as long as they are good. The goodness is an enduring thing. So unlike friendships of utility and friendships of pleasure, virtuous friendships bring people together because of who those people are, because of their character traits. And I'll say more about that in a moment. The other person's character and virtue is what attracts us to them, not just how we feel when we're around them. I don't just get addicted to some endorphin kick or butterflies in my stomach or fluttering feelings in my chest when I'm around the person. I love the person. And how often in life do we mistake that? Do we think we love the person, but really what we love is how we feel when we're around them, and we become addicted to the feedback that we're getting in our own bodies from the other person's proximity to us. But that's not the same as loving the person. That's just loving how they make you feel, which isn't the right thing in the long run if what you want is something virtuous and sustainable. That's what makes friendships of virtue so stable, because these sorts of traits that we care about in the other, that we admire in the other person, are not so changeable. They tend to grow and increase, especially under the influence of a loving friendship. And when you have someone in your life who brings out the best in you and who expects the best of you and holds you accountable, this kind of relationship inspires us to be our best selves. Such friendships are also quite rare. And when we combine that rarity with Aristotle's previous observation about the worth of friendship for a life worth living, we get a very dark argument, but one that's really important to reflect on. And the argument looks something like this. Look, a life without friends is a life not worth living. But the only really true friend is a friend of virtue. And friends of virtue are rare. Therefore, a life really worth living is rare. Now, a nuanced reading of Aristotle will probably give us some resources to push back against the second claim, the claim that the only true friend is the friend of virtue. Aristotle can arguably be read as saying, you know, at the end of the day, friendships of pleasure and friendships of utility are friends too. But the contrast between those two types of friendship and a friend of virtue is so stark. And when you realize how much loving a friend because of how they make you feel involves a certain kind of instrumentalization, a kind of emotional math in which the value of the other is indexed to the amount of pleasure you feel, when you see that that is a kind of impersonal way of creating certain feelings in yourself via the other person, I think we should incline very strongly to the cultivation of friends of virtue and to be weary of some of the objectifying, instrumentalizing pitfalls of friends of pleasure, let alone friends of utility. So why do we do this? Why do we miss out on virtue and get addicted to our feelings and use other people to feel a certain way? I think the start of Aristotle's answer, and I think it's a plausible answer, is that we are really bad at distinguishing between feelings and states of character when we try to figure out what the right thing to want is in various kinds of relationships with others. So here's Aristotle. This is a bit of jargon, but bear with me. He says, now it looks as if loving were a feeling, friendship, a state of character. For loving may be felt just as much towards lifeless things, but mutual love involves choice, and choice springs from a state of character. And people wish well to those whom they love for their own sake, not as a result of feeling, but as a result of a state of their character. And in loving a friend, people love what is good for themselves, for the good person in becoming a friend becomes good to their friend. Each then, both loves what is good in themselves and makes an equal return in goodwill and in pleasantness. For friendship is said to be equality, and both of these are found most in the friendship of the good. So this distinction between love as a feeling and friendship as a state of character is really important, because it's not loving another person well as a friend is not just about feeling a certain way towards them. It's about choices and the establishment of reciprocity in action. Feelings can happen for inanimate objects that we're fond of, but friendship is a dyadic state of our character in relation to others. And loving others well as a friend or otherwise is a character trait that is expressed in action and not just some private feeling that we have towards someone else when they're around us. So this is something that has to be cultivated, the cultivation of equality and reciprocity through goodwill. That is what metabolizes feelings and turns them into structured forms of life that allow us to pay attention to the beloved in ways that are skillful. So we begin to see why these kinds of friendship are so rare, but also so strong when they arise, because they mutually reinforce each other through reciprocal effort. And the individuals involved grow and develop through mutual influence. That is the kind of relationship worth wanting, whether it be a fraternal relationship, a familiar relationship, or a romantic relationship, because those kinds of relationships make life worth living. And the best kind are rare and must be cherished. And in order to live a morally upright life, we need friends of that sort so they can hold us accountable and, through their own good example, force us to be better versions of ourselves so that we can be worthy of them and them of us. And so the last thing I want to say is, if you have a friend like this in your life, go hug them right now and say thank you, because you could be dead tomorrow. And if that were to happen, your life will have been worth living because of that relationship, and hopefully many others like it. And so the last thought I will say is, the reason I wanted to make this video was to express my gratitude to my friends, because I feel very blessed by the friends that I have in my life. And I'm very thankful for their support and for the ways they force me to look at myself when I'm feeling down, because through their eyes, I feel better about myself when I see how they take care of me and love me, and I them. And that's a beautiful thing. So you know who you are. Thank you for being my friend, and I hope you got something out of this video.